help me welcome Byron.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Do you have your register and a pin here? I don't need it right this second. And if anybody be interested, I'm going to speak at this conference in California weekend March 12th to the 15th. And if you'd like to have a flyer on it, just for your own information, there's plenty here, and I have more in my case. Also, I have a few books with me after I get through speaking. If you think you might like one of them, I will be able to sell you one. And actually, this is a really good meeting, a really good subject for me, because it actually starts just exactly the same way. My journey from where I started, where I stand right now, started with the exact same question that he just asked. How does the monetary system work? And I used to have a ranch in South Dakota, and we did pretty well on it, and we expanded a lot, but it seemed like it was always hard to get ahead cash-wise. It didn't seem to be that way from Uncle, who was a generation or two ahead of me, and I began to wonder just exactly how does this whole system work? I mean, how can you work and produce wealth out of the ground all the time? And my definition of wealth is it takes three things combined at exactly the same time to produce any wealth. And that is, you have to have the knowledge to do something, you have to have the labor to do it with, and you have the raw materials to work with. And if you combine those three things, you create wealth. Now, the value of that wealth comes from whatever somebody's willing to give you for it. And that can change minute by minute. If you don't think that the value of things can change minute by minute, just turn on your TV and watch the stock market for a day or two. I guarantee you it just changes by seconds. So see, there's no such thing as saying something has a certain value because it only has a certain value at a certain given time. My daddy taught me that when I was probably 12, 14, something like that. We was up visiting the neighbor. In fact, my dad was a pretty good cowboy, and therefore his sons weren't too bad. And we did a lot of work for the neighbors like that who didn't do so much cowboying. And Dad got to talking with a guy, and he said, I got these 3 bulls I need to sell. They're going to start breeding their own heifers. I don't want that. And, Dad said, well, what do you want for them? I could maybe use some bulls. So they agreed on the price, and when the guy left, he said, Byron, get on your horse and drive the bulls down to the neighbor. When you get there, I'll have them sold to that guy. So I rode about 7 or 8 miles, and when I got there, the guy had the check ready, and he sold the bulls for $100 more than he bought. So I saw right away that this value is kind of subjective, just depending on who you're talking to at the right time compared to who you're talking to a little bit later, at the right time. And anyway, so I began my whole journey by starting. Actually, it was a strange thing how it happened, because I began to really think about this, and I was always looking for a better way to manage. And one day I was talking to my wife about it, and I saw an ad in what we called a beef magazine I got at that time on the ranch. And it talked about a management meeting that was going to be held in Boulder, Colorado. And the more I read about it, the more I got interested. And so when I left that morning to go out and do whatever I was doing, I said, would you please call them and see what you could learn about it? And she did, and I think probably it was noon or so when I come back in. And she said, Byron, I finally think I found the exact same thing you're looking for. I mean, this sounds to me like the best thing that I've ever heard of. And so we decided to take a family trip just before school. It was in August when they had it. Take the kids, 2 boys. We had 2 sons. We went down there. And while we was down there, the guy had an actual sheet, kind of like the handout sheet. And he was going through about 5 different ranching operations or farming operations that actual financial records that they had kept. It was put on by Beef Magazine and a management firm. And they was working with those certain operators to do their books. And as I looked through it, I noticed one thing that really struck me, and that was that some of them got bigger and some of them didn't, but they all got deeper in debt. And that struck me kind of strange. And as I listened, it was clear. It was one of them times, again, like today, when the bankers pulled back the money, we had a poor economy and everybody was suffering. And only at that time, they raised the interest from 9 to 18%. And of course, all these guys were getting in trouble if they owed their money. And so as I looked at that, a thought occurred to me. And so I said, well, if we're all borrowing this money, where's it come from? And he just said, well, it's just funny money. They just print it. You hear this all the time. They just print this money. And I said, well, if somebody just prints this off a printing press and we all borrow it, who gets the interest off the printing press? And he said, nobody. I said, now I'm having trouble with that because I'm just having trouble believing that could be true. Because if we've all borrowed this money, I know I pay interest, and I'll bet everybody in this room pays interest. Well, then somebody asked to get it. And just like that, he turned across the room and said, what was it you wanted? And as far as he's concerned, I disappeared. He never looked at me again the whole rest of the conference. And when I walked out the door, a woman walked by me. She kind of nudged me. I didn't know what the heck was going on. I looked to see why I was in the road. And she just turned to me and quietly said, you need to look into the Federal Reserve. To be real honest, I didn't have a clue what the heck she was talking about. I went home, and my son had just graduated from college about the next spring. And I think that was the fall. We went through that winter. And I told my wife I wanted to figure out exactly how to do our books, just exactly like they did at the company. She said, well, Byron, sounds like a good idea. Get going. I said, I don't know how to do it. She said, I don't either. So what am I doing? So we put our heads together. By spring, we had it all. I mean, I really knew. I knew exactly where everything was going. I could predict it for 5 years ahead of time, probably where it was going to go. I could tell you exactly what my expenses would be for a year. In fact, I actually did it one time, predicted it for the year before. It turned out I missed it by 500 gallons of gas. I used 500 gallons of gas more than I figured everything else was right on the point. And then I looked back, I forgot to put in down how much I drove my pickup around, in the pasture and stuff, which I just never thought about that like that. So it was kind of interesting. It taught me a lot. And then one day I was talking to my oldest son, and he just graduated from high school now, this in the spring. And I was asking him all kinds of questions. He's a pretty smart kid. He just graduated from high school, and I thought he sure must know something. And I hate to admit this, but all I did in high school was play sports and chase girls, so I didn't learn a whole lot. But he was a pretty good student, and I thought he knew better. And I kept asking him questions. One day he looked at me and said, Dad, we have just too much work to do for you to stand here and ask me all these questions, and I don't even have a clue what the heck you're asking about. But he said, I'll make you a deal. He said, if I can see this is really bothering you and you're really concerned, so I'll make you a deal. I and my little brother will do all the work. We'll run this 5,000-acre ranch. You won't have to do a thing. Just go in the house and sit down and start studying until you figure out what it is. But the deal is you don't ask me any more questions. And I said, are you serious? He said, you bet I'm serious. I said, you just made yourself a deal. And believe it or not, that's exactly what happened. I went in the house. We had a little bedroom. We turned it into an office, and I went to study. I called everybody I could think about. I wrote letters to everybody. I called the state library and asked them questions about different things, and they'd say, well, do you have any authors or any books? I said, I have a clue. That's why I called you. And pretty quick, when I'd call them up, they'd say, oh, hi, Mr. Dale. What do you want to know today? And I'd say this and that. And they say, well, we kind of think we know what you're looking for. We'll see what books you can find, and we'll send them to you. And one day I was down there doing that, and Roosevelt had changed the weight of the gold dollar. I don't know if any of you knew that in the 33s, and you obviously do. But he had changed the weight of the gold dollar. It was 28 9/8, I think. And don't hold me to that exactly. And then after he confiscated all the gold, or said you got to turn it in and take the paper, he then changed it to 15 5/21. And I couldn't find that anyplace. I knew what it was before. And so I was down there, and I was talking to them, and they couldn't find it either. And I used to, when I was younger, had a little charm, and so I just really applied all I had. And she was a nice lady, and so she gave in after a while. And she said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll call Washington and see what I can find out. And so she did, and we started out with a woman named Dolly Wells. And we asked her what they changed the weight of the gold dollar to. And she said, I don't know. But I could probably, if you'd write me a letter, I could probably find it. And so I was kind of impatient too, a young man, kind of impatient. So I kind of asked her some more and begged a little bit. So she called the next person. And we did that for an hour. And we called the last person. Nobody knew, but they said suggest somebody else. The last person we talked to said, well, I don't know, but I'm sure if you'd called Dolly Wells, she would know. And I've always called that the Washington Shuffle. They just shuffle you around and around, but nobody knows anything and nobody tells you anything.